Welcome, Gaffers and Gigglers, to the Laugh Tracker. My name is Fork, yes really, and on this show, I ruin jokes with math. It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and terrible adult animated comedies with shocking crude humor and stereotyped casts on TV. But where did they get that well-hashed formula in which they all rely? Well, lucky there is Family Guy. Running since 1999, Seth MacFarlane's Family Guy is one of the most successful and longest-running animated series of all time. With 24 seasons and 435 episodes, there are very few shows who can say they have the same cultural impact. Even as we entered the internet age and the death of cable, Family Guy has flourished as shareable clips, reaction images, and funny moments on across anywhere video is shown. It's perhaps only rivaled by SpongeBob in its ubiquitous quality. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of moments and jokes that sneak their way onto your feed right next to footage of Subway Surfers.
Right? No, they're not real. Or are they? Ah, salad! Ah!
It is not a stretch to say that almost every single episode of this show has been used in some meme somewhere out there. However, you rarely hear people talk about full individual episodes. A show like South Park also holds a lot of attention with its cultural event-based plots and commentary, but Family Guy's reputation is far less respected discussion or praise, as it is tepid, quiet background noise, which always seems to be around and accepted, but rarely taken seriously. So let's take it seriously! Let's take a look at a full episode of Family Guy to see how funny these moments really are. Are all the jokes gold, or are they mostly all crap? And most importantly, how many jokes are there in an episode? For this, I'm interested in looking into the most average telling episode of Family Guy possible. So I went onto IMDb and chose the episode with the most average reviews across the entire series. The median rated episode at 6.9 stars out of 10, episode 17 of season 12, The Most Interesting Man in the World, released in 2014. Without any further ado, let's track its laughs. Before jumping into the episode proper, I wanted to go over the theme song sequence. Across 30 seconds, there were about 4 jokes I could identify. 1. Lucky there's a Family Guy. The show is conceived as a parody of itself at its very core, presenting its brand of crude, explicit humor as the bastion for good old-fashioned values away from sex and violence. Johnny, bring up the sex and violence counters. 2. Golden Stairway. This visual gag is easy to overlook after so many viewings, but I'd still say the impact and glamour makes it a solid hit. 3. Joe's Dancing. Decent background gag that would have been easy to dismiss. Neat touch. 4. Laugh and Cry. The delivery from Stewie gives this line a dual meaning, that Peter can both be funny and cruel. Pretty indicative of the whole show. And a solid, subtle hit. So far, pretty solid. They haven't touched this intro in 20 years for a reason. It's genuinely good. But let's get into the episode proper to see if it keeps up. 5. You shower with your dog every day. Most episodes of Family Guy start with a ridiculous TV segment, and this one is no different. It's an absurd and decently funny thing to say at the start of your parody ad. I'll call it a hit. 6. Dialed Cross Species. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with that momentum. The parody of Dial doesn't do much with its premise, and misses an opportunity for a funnier logo or name. That's a miss. 7. Smells Like Beef. Picks back up again a little, but would have been stronger if it emphasized how it would make your hair smell like beef. 8. Wife's Response. The opening gag goes out with a whimper. The wife finds out he's showering with the dog again, and just goes, "What the hell?" Overly simple and reliant on the same premise without adding much of anything. Hard miss. 9. Bonnie at the shooting range. We don't even get another joke before we're thrust into another cutaway gag, unfortunately losing the shock from the violence by being way too telegraphed. Another miss. 10. Bonnie shreds man in wheelchair. Glad the gag has a bit more going on, and this is fine enough, if a little too on the nose and overplayed for Bonnie's character. 11. Joe suggests bringing someone else. Drags the joke a step too far, especially with how on the nose Joe's response is. A more sheepish or naive, glad we're spending time together, Could have saved it with some irony, but as is, it's pretty bad. Miss. For those keeping track at home, that's 2 cutaway gags and 11 jokes in the first minute of the episode. Half of said minute was taken up by the intro, and the plot has not started. We're in for the long haul, baby. Let's keep a cutaway counter and try to speed it up a little bit. 12. Look at Michael J. Fox. A cutaway with no actual cutaway, and the first joke to make me laugh on the first viewing. A nice, snappy subversion that doubles as characterizing Peter through his excuse. Solid hit. 13. Peter and Stewie's prostate exam. Again, well implemented as a demonstration of Peter's bad parenting. I like how absurdly stupid it is that he claims Stewie is him in first person. Another hit. 14. The way I'm sitting. This line about Peter's little Peter could have been really simple and juvenile, and it is written that way, but Seth's earnest delivery and Peter's expression, almost like Peter is flattered at the comment, saves it for me through sheer stupidity. A third hit in a row, wow. 15. Divorced dad. A joke about child support. This didn't need so many lines. It's really cynical and more sad than anything from not going far enough, really. Reads like an actual divorced dad venting, and it's just really awkward. Miss. 16. The clown car. A joke being bad on purpose is a ballsy play, and it did not work out. I'll talk more about this one in the analysis, but just know it's a big old miss. 17. Bucket of confetti. From 3 hits in a row to 3 misses. This joke is way too within your expectations to be at all funny, and the lack of any animation really hurts it. Joe sure does have fun with a clown off screen. 18. Daddy can still see ya. A nice bit of visual comedy here. Peter's head PNG sliding in and out of the door is an especially nice touch. I'll give it a hit. 19. Peter rips his eyeball out. Peter takes keeping an eye on Stewie to the next level. Very visceral and a good level of gross to be shocking but not horrifying. Doesn't quite get a hit from me, but it's a decently creative continuation of the gag. 20. Peter's eyeball looks under a skirt, and now he takes it to the previous level again. This escalation feels more like a lazy de-escalation to an all-too-safe overplayed joke. Miss. 21. Winks to the camera. As cute as it is to have a literal wink to the camera lead to a figurative wink to the camera, the fourth wall break is really misplaced here and takes you out of the episode. All while also being quite lame in delivery. Miss. 22. Superman 1. X-rayed breasts. What if Superman was a pervert? Is about as simple a TV gag can get, but this is way too over-explained for what could have been a somewhat fun, if a bit cynical gag. Cut half the lines and it would be way better. Miss. Superman 2. Superman's reaction. Superman goes around giving all women cancer because he's horny. Kinda okay escalation, I guess, but still makes the whole joke worse through even more explanation and completely lacking in direction. Very stilted dialogue and a very bad miss. 24. Wait out the thunderstorm. Actually a pretty subtle and clever joke about Peter forgetting about Stewie outside that uses the time jump really effectively. Wish it came up later instead of leaving no impact, but as a standalone line, it's a hit. 25. Joe does a great Stewie. Joe's impression doesn't drag itself out too far and doesn't over-explain itself. Actually subverted what I expected from the joke. A nice solid hit. 26. Beef jerky. Joe asks Lois to get Stewie beef jerky for some reason. I don't fully get this one, but it's not anything too lingering and charming enough to get by for me. 27. My friend that sort of looks like me from behind. A boring, lazy, lame joke that serves only to undermine the story being told. Another one I'll have more to say on later on, but for now, giant mess. 28. Across the country, grandparent Stewie. This cutaway makes 0 sense, and not in a funny way. It's really forced, and goes on way, way, way too long. Massive miss. 29. Old Stewie is frightened. What is supposed to be funny about this? Haha, a grandparent crying at being yelled at. It's not even shocking or offensive. It's just confusing. What's the joke? Worst miss yet. 30. What happened to your head? I was tempted to not even call this a joke, but I guess acknowledging the character's designs like that occasionally is kind of fun. 31. I'm your new dad. Good setup and play on the situation. This whole mix-up bit is probably the most effective part storytelling-wise in the entire episode. Good situation comedy. 32. I work at NASA. Inoffensive and decently done joke that characterizes Peter well and doesn't take away from the plot. Not the funniest thing, but a solid continuation of this bit. 33. You look fat, you should go run. Second joke to make me laugh on my first watch. Pretty good. Could have been better if Lois's reaction wasn't so plain, but the line itself is a very nice hit. 34. An affair with a grapefruit. This only really exists so Peter distracts Lois 3 times. Very cliche joke, but not eye-rolling. 35. Peter's run upstairs. The animation of this is funny enough for me to consider it a joke. One of the only parts of the episode where the animation really adds to it. 36. Human baby asleep in Stewie's overalls. Peter's attempt at a deflection is really by the numbers here, only really exists to get Peter to distract Lois 3 times, again, losing steam rather than escalating. But it's keeping a decent enough pace to not get grating. 37. Woke up the doorbell. Well timed and just barely stupid enough to work for me. Especially since the joke works as a solid transition into the next scene. Ends the sequence with a hit. 38. Little hat. Peter steals a funny hat. Whatever. Would have been better if the kid did in fact have the little hat before Peter picked him up. 39. I took a bath with the dad. Stewie was potentially molested. Wow! Not explicit or absurd enough to be funny with such a dark and perverse subject. It feels more cruel and awkward than shocking, almost cowardly in its lack of commitment. Big miss. 40. Lois passed the test. Almost gets to a hit, but it's just a little too similar to the other obvious lie jokes we've been seeing in the last few minutes. Could have been better, but as is, it's fine. 41. An Inconvenient Tooth by Weird Al. Okay. I promise you there is nothing else to the joke than what I just said and the image on screen. This feels like a setup with no punchline. It is a terrible miss. 42. You don't mean that! I genuinely can't tell if this is supposed to be funny or if I should genuinely feel bad for Peter. On the one hand, it is his actual reaction, which carries through onto his next actions, but it also has a direct setup with how he says, "You're gonna say something you don't mean." Feels like a comedic punchline, while also reading like a drama. The fact I can't tell which is a really bad sign for both. Miss. 43. Stewie gets a friend request from Bath Dad. Yay, now he's being groomed! Awesome! Please stop. It's awkward and badly timed. It should have at least come up way later in the episode. It doesn't even have a third payoff. Such a bad miss. 44. An eye mix-up at the park. Works great as a transition out of the first act, bringing back previous gags by combining the kid mix-up with the ripping out eye bit into a collective payoff. Genuinely very clever and fun. Weird to see this show take its time to build jokes up after everything else. Great joke, solid hit. 45. Realistic Karate Kid. Way too telegraphed and played way too straight. These characters have realistic human feelings isn't a thing you need to specify to make your joke make sense. At least it shouldn't be. Miss. 46. All women are depressed. The joke is misogyny. There really is very little else to read into here. I doubt the writers are misogynistic, but it really just reads as a try-hard, edgy joke. Miss. 47. Don't engage, don't engage. Pretty cliche joke, but Warburton's delivery of why being so genuine and soft really elevates it to a hit for me. 48. So? Acknowledging the obvious problem with the episode's premise in a neat way. Lois calls Peter an idiot every episode. Why should it matter now? There isn't a great answer, but I'm glad it was acknowledged to keep up the illusion of farce. 49. Lois's cancerous mole. A little too dark to be so dismissively brought up, and it feels out of place in the scene, but it's saved slightly by the fact they actually animated Quagmire reacting, which is insane for this episode. 50. 2 foreign guys in the next booth over. Joe says 2 foreign dude next to them are being too loud, and they apologize. That's it. Is it supposed to be racist? I'm genuinely asking. I can't tell what the funny part is supposed to be. It does a bad job of being racist, if that's the intention. Miss. 51. There are no women here conversation. Is the entire joke that they have funny voices? Like, We stay on these guys for so long, and I have no idea why. Another miss? 52. The foreign guys are terrible CBS writers. Then we transition the joke into a shot at CBS? Does CBS hire a lot of dumb foreign writers? Is this an inside joke in the writer's room? What is this bit? Miss. 53. Peter's a dumb hot guy. Fine joke, does a good job at getting the conversation back on track with Peter lacking self-awareness. Not ha-ha funny, but works. 54. See new places, inconvenience thousands of people. I appreciate it being quick and punchy, and tourists do suck, but it's worded a bit oddly to really hit hard. 55. Local boy gets lifetime supply of candy. Peter doesn't turn down opportunities ever since he missed that suspicious free candy truck. Has great timing with a well-paced, quiet presentation, and is an extremely good play on the cutaway setup. One of the only cutaways here to really feel earned and really add to the episode. Hit. 56. Local boy gets molested. Next time, Peter goes with the stranger and ends up molested. You ruined it! This punchline is way too obvious to be at all shocking. It just feels mean-spirited. Even goes against the original premise, which was about passing up opportunities. It's edgy for the sake of edgy and completely lost the plot. Sad. Miss. 57. The Deaf Games. Right into another cutaway gag, we have deaf boxers that go way past the bell. Took me a second to get it. Pretty good and clever joke. Hit. 58. The Deaf Games crowd reaction. And they ruined it again. We cut to the onlookers of the match so they can explain the joke to you. Maybe they think the audience is deaf too. I sure wish I was if they're gonna keep explaining jokes. Miss. 59. Peter won the court case about not wearing pants at work. Whatever joke that's clunky and signature Family Guy brand offensive, but there are far worse offenders and it's nothing too bad. 60. John Goodman is fat. The joke in this cutaway is that John Goodman is fat. Ignore the fact that he lost 100 pounds since 2010 when this episode came out. John Goodman is fat, and that's hilarious. Don't get me wrong, you can make a good joke about someone being fat, but you need to do more than the idea of them being fat. Miss. 61. We were completely out of these tubes. It's a whatever joke, but it works fine as an excuse to get Peter traveling without a ton of work. 62. Did you say chicken fashion show? They did not. Pretty weird iteration of the classic "did you say X" style line, but it works alright as a bit of awkward humor, I guess. 63. Chicago, the San Francisco treat. Peter Griffin sure is being Peter Griffin. Fine one-off zinger that isn't very deep or clever, but it is fine. 64. Peter goes cave jumping without telling anyone. This joke doesn't work, because by the very nature of the setup, the implication that something bad happens to Peter while cave jumping is just impossible. He's clearly fine in the present and remembers it as a fun, exciting experience. He should have shuddered about it, or some other context should have preceded the cutaway if we were going to do this joke. Miss. 65. Peter is the 5th most attractive woman in Chicago. Convoluted way of saying Chicago women are ugly, and that's the whole joke. I couldn't find any kind of stereotype or reputation similar to this online, so I just have to assume it is an entirely cheap, made-up shot at nothing. Bad. Miss. 66. Peter should touch everything at the museum, right? Peter doesn't know museum etiquette. Played way too straight to leave any kind of impact. Just meh. 67. Peter's first time in an adult museum. Peter's childlike innocence is kinda cute if you squint, but it isn't particularly funny. A lot of meh in this part of the episode. 68. The Dennis Farina audio tape. I had to look up who Dennis Farina was for this joke, and it seems extremely simplistic. He is just a Chicago guy, and I guess he's known for being sloppy? Another whatever gag. Very boring set of jokes here. 69. He was a midge, but he painted like a normal. Peter's very thoughtful nod saved this overly edgy joke. 70. The naked chick. The audio tape gags are already getting repetitive on its second piece. Not even a step up from the previous description. 71. He did a great job with the vagina. Peter yells the word vagina at a child. Why are we so afraid to escalate or do anything with this museum bit besides say vaguely offensive things? The kid didn't even react. It's just the sheer concept of being rude that we're supposed to be laughing at. Hard miss. 72. Salvador Dali was a wackadoodle. The joke has anti-escalated. This should have been the first one. It's by far the least weird thing that Farina says, and yet it's the third thing we hear. Couldn't even get the basic rule of threes right. Big miss. 73. Peter declines gay sex. There is absolutely nothing more to this joke than that. I don't think they had any ideas for these travel-based jokes. Miss. 74. Peter buys new glasses. Despite still having absolutely nothing to do with him actually traveling, this is a pretty good visual gag. I like that it uses the forbidden rule of 4. Hit. 75. Different sized tubes. Ha 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 ha. Get it? Because penis! He gave the black guy a big tube and the Asian guy a little tube, because that is their penis size. Ha 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 ha. Wow, so funny. Miss. 76. Chess montage used to indicate increased intelligence. It's not a great self-aware joke, it's pretty lazy overall, but I do quite like how it sets up into the next joke. 77. A-Rod gropes cocktail waitress. Very funny use of the newspaper montage gag by just throwing in something completely random with no real telegraphing. This is how you use shock humor and how you do rule of thirds. Also makes great use of multimedia with just a straight up real picture. Works great even if you don't get the reference. This montage was extremely hit or miss, but this one's a hit. 78. Garofalufalo. Lois says no to this gag. This is the second joke in the episode that does this. The show has way too many cutaways to get away with calling this one too bad to see, though. 79. I don't know what either of those words mean. After asking his dad how he is, Chris gets the answer, exemplary, Chris, from a now smart Peter. Chris doesn't know what either of those words mean. One of the best jokes in the episode. It's pretty funny, clever, subtle, creative. It's just a great hit. 80. One of those words was Chris. Stop! Please stop! You don't need to explain all your jokes. Oh my god, miss! 81. Brian's a wolf cat. After Peter says more smart words, Chris says a brain-dead non sequitur that has absolutely nothing to do with anything at all. Miss. I think the writers hate comedy. 82. Let's hump! Lois is very attracted to smart Peter and expresses that far less sophisticated than he does. It's fine. Gets us to the next scene. Let's get that sex counter up. 83. Affirmative. Peter says affirmative instead of yes during loud sex. They felt the need to explain that those meant the same thing earlier, by the way. And, oh dear heavens, or something instead of just a normal oh my god before he arrives. Could have made it funnier. 84. A week's worth of arrive on the bedspread. A fine end to this short bit, I guess. At least they didn't feel the need to explain that arrive and come are synonyms. 85. The TV's broken! The zoom out makes a pretty snappy, funny little reveal here. Could totally see this killing in a joke compilation with a perfect cut. Hit. 86. Game of Thrones. Peter demonstrates that books are just as good as TV by suggesting Frankenstein over The Walking Dead, Jane Eyre over New Girl, and Game of Thrones over Game of Thrones. There's so much build-up that this whatever punchline almost makes it a miss, but it's not too bad. 87. Brian is a fake reader. Brian not even being able to name a single book for several moments is overly repetitive and nonsensical. Even a fraud fake book fan like me can name one. This should have been a joke about substance, but that would require effort. It's very obvious the writers are also not readers, especially with how Peter only references books I read in high school. 88. Peter rents a car stuck on National Public Radio. It's fine, mostly serves as a mediocre setup to the real joke. 89. NPR Peter. The real joke is also mediocre. Peter talks quietly and sadly. Molested and abused by his father. Very dark Peter backstory in this episode. 90. Titillating. Did you know that this word sounds sexual? Are you laughing yet? Miss. 91. Peter writes poetic advice on the bathroom wall. Is this like a thing that happens often in public bathrooms? This joke is really confusing to me. My notes were literally just, what? What? Miss? 92. Shubha Prabhatam. This entire scene is incomprehensible. I couldn't even begin to tell you what the joke here is supposed to be. The words sound silly? He said the word porn? He's just saying shit? Miss. 93. Family giggle. Peter says some fancy words that sound like sex words, and then the kids laugh. There is no escalation and no punchline. That is the entire joke. Miss. 94. Morgan Freeman's dick. His face has spots, so a spotted dick could be his? Sure, whatever. It's something, I guess. 95. Wizard Robot and his less successful friend. The show that the Ford guys were talking about making is real. I would actually like this gag a lot more if it wasn't framed as something terribly unfunny that's parodying CBS shows. It's actually just as good as the rest of the episode. 96. Meeting with Form 12 group mates. An attempt to make dialogue feel foreign and unnatural in this parody show accidentally makes a line which is borderline incomprehensible, and not in a funny, absurd way. It's just gibberish. Miss. 97. No comedic situation will befall us when we leave. Would have actually been really funny if nothing happened and the show was just boring. But no, it has a joke, which I could unironically see being part of this episode. It's a bad parody, but as a joke, it's meh. Hashtag renew Wizard Robot and his less successful friend. 98. Hey Lois, no I wasn't! I'm unsure whether to even call this a joke, it just feels like a real reaction again. But it's fine, this entire last section is so rushed, it kinda needs to be basic. 99. Lois has vocabulary homework. A good concept for Peter to try to make his family smarter, but the fact he never acts this mean on screen, and this is the only real example of him forcing anything on anyone, makes the conflict really weak. 100. Brian uses anodyne in a sentence. He doesn't know what it means, and says, a friend asked me what anodyne means. This is the least creative thing you could have possibly done. Miss. 101. Pilot without a calming voice. Cause the pilot yelled, everyone on the plane went crazy and died violently. Badly timed, poorly set up, and just bad. Miss. 102. Welcome to Tucson. This is the least creative joke I have ever seen in my life. How do we convey that the people in this city are dumb? I know, they punch each other in the nuts and have screwed up faces. And that's it. That is the only joke they do with it. You could have made an entire episode out of the concept that a smart Peter Griffin maneuvers through a city of idiots in a role reversal of our usual status quo. But no, they just punch him in the nuts. That's the only thing you can think to do with this concept. This is an offensively bad joke. Ms. 103. Peter farted on the doorstep. He farted. I'm not calling it a miss purely because it at least serves the purpose of showing he's dumb again. I'm desperate to give this episode anything, man. 104. What Peter did in Tucson. He saw a chocolate milk wet t-shirt contest, and that is the end of the list. They really did have no ideas. Miss. And for our last joke, 105. Battleship is still in theaters in Tucson. You know what? Fine. Absolutely does not work as an end of the episode stinger, especially since Peter just didn't finish his emotional arc of his self-esteem, even a little bit. But hey, at least it's over. I don't know if you can tell, but I didn't enjoy the episode very much. But as we all know, comedy isn't in any way subjective and can only be measured mathematically. So, let's go over the stats. Our total jokes tally comes out to 105 jokes. Over a runtime of 21 minutes, that leaves us with a clean 5 jokes a minute, or every 12 seconds on average. I was competing with the episode runtime just listing them all. There are 15 cutaway gags total, averaging out to 0.71 a minute, or a cutaway gag every 84 seconds. That's not including the time taken up by cutaway gags. They really are constant. Out of all the jokes, 21 of them involved sex in some capacity, and 10 involved violence. That makes for 1 sex joke a minute, or 1 every 60 seconds, and 0.48 violent jokes a minute, or 1 every 125 seconds. Together, you'd be seeing a joke about either violence or sex 1.48 times a minute, or once every 40 seconds. Violence really does seem to be for the movies, but God, is there a lot of sex on TV. To get to less objective numbers, out of all jokes, there were only 18 hits, averaging out to 0.86 hits a minute, or just over a minute between every good joke. Honestly, in a vacuum, not that bad. The episode certainly is not completely absent of good jokes. However, in comparison, there were 45 misses, with 2.14 misses per minute, aka a bad joke every 28 seconds. To put that in perspective, the hit or miss ratio is 0.4, or 2.5 bad jokes for every single good one. But what does that mean really? After all, numbers are just a number. Let's find out in the analysis. To start off with some positives, I wasn't kidding when I said the sheer volume of jokes does let a few good ones sneak through. I laughed multiple times on my first watch, and there is a real merit to that. For all my griping, I can't say this is worthless television. When the show lets itself breathe and work to its strength, it really works. I shouldn't be surprised to say that the voice acting is consistently strong. This cast can squeeze out comedy from a flat setup when the material isn't actively terrible. Take the joke where Peter is with Stewie in the park and a woman next to him asks, "Is that your little one?" And Peter responds by quickly crossing his legs and going, "Oh no, this is just the way I'm sitting." I'm sure none of you laughed right now, because I said it flatly. It's not a particularly clever joke that is far more crude and cliche than it is well written. Haha, Peter has a little Peter, haha. But Seth's delivery of the line, written to be embarrassing and out of pocket, turns it into an absurdist and weirdly wholesome delivery that contrasts with the subject matter in a way which surprised me. Peter's soft, caught off guard, but almost pleasantly, like someone noticing a new haircut you got. Maybe it was written to convey embarrassment, but the way he says it and the animators painting a quaint little smile over it really was unexpected and funny. Same goes for Patrick Warburton's straightforward delivery when Joe does an impression of Stewie that has the same deep, straight, honest delivery he always has. Or in the small, do not engage bit with his wistful, "why?" that you can feel in your soul. They're common, almost overdone jokes, but a great voice actor can take even the simplest joke and make it really hit by delivery alone. But even then, the writers aren't incapable either. There are a handful of jokes that are great and even properly built into the episode's structure, as rare as they are. Wait Out the Thunderstorm uses a jump cut to convey a time jump and Peter's negligence in the same breath. It is economical in a way very few jokes are. We Woke Up the Doorbell is a great, tidy little transition gag. It keeps the scene moving and lets the story pivot without stalling. And there's even a joke which actively plays off earlier bits. The eyeball mix-up at the park actually rewards an audience member for having been paying attention and remembering something from earlier in the episode. The Peter and Stewie's prostate exam cutaway is dumb in concept, yet it perfectly illustrates Peter's selfishness and plays a part in setting up the episode's conflict, something no other cutaway gag here really does. But ultimately, these examples are few and far between. Those four I just listed are the only jokes in the entire episode I would say actively benefited from and added to the episode's story. Ideally, you'd want most of your jokes in a situation comedy to play off of the situation. A bit weird for a sitcom, huh? To round off positives, there were a few clean visual wins. Take the traveling montage, for instance. The glasses bit is a crisp sight gag, which subverts the usual rule of threes and takes a creative, extra absurd swing, which is best described as playful rather than disruptive. And it ends with another great visual joke too, with the A-Rod headline, using a realistic asset and awareness of tropes to actually surprise you, and shows it knows how to handle disruption just as well. There are moments that hint at a sharper show, a quicker, smarter, more confident show that knows the ropes enough to leave without a "do you get it" after every punchline. Sometimes it is that show, and for the first 2 or 3 seasons, it really was that show, but unfortunately, it is not that show. Because, as we saw in the stats, there are over 2 bad jokes for every good one. Most of the time, the show will not leave well enough alone. Good bits get sanded down by a bad follow-up, or explained to death. Take the cutaway where Peter reflects on how he won't let opportunities pass him by because of an experience as a kid. We flash back to see Peter approached by a suspicious man in a van offering him free candy. He says no and runs off, but later reads in a newspaper, quietly left for the audience to read and take in themselves, that another kid won a lifetime supply of candy by taking the opportunity that he couldn't. This is a great use of the setup that subverts expectations using a dark subject matter that makes great use of relief, absurdity, and visuals to tell the joke. It's genuinely really clever, and I've actually seen this clip before watching the episode, likely for that reason. But unfortunately, that is not the end of the cutaway. We immediately cut to Kid Peter being approached by another man in a car who offers him free candy. He takes it this time, and we cut to a newspaper assuring us that this child has been molested. Not only is this as incredibly predictable as a punchline, but it completely contradicts the original setup of Peter not wanting to pass up opportunities. If this story ended with such a scarring experience because he jumped at an opportunity, then certainly he'd feel the opposite. It is both entirely within expectations and also the last thing that should have happened. And when dealing with a subject matter as sensitive and an event as serious as this, a joke falling flat like that where it removes all the shock will end up making an audience uncomfortable at best. What happened here is obvious. The writers wanted to expand the joke further and escalate it without properly considering what made the original idea funny, taking it way too far and losing the plot. This happens fairly often with the jokes, especially in the cutaways. The Def Games has a simple setup and punchline, where someone says they're going to a sporting event called the Def Games, and we see a boxing match where one boxer continues destroying his opponent even though the bell is ringing, because he can't hear it, of course. This hits as a premise, and you instantly get the joke after about a second or two. But it lasts far longer than that, cutting the camera to the crowd to explain the joke out loud to you, asking the audience why they continue the fight like this is Dora the Explorer. It crashes far harder than it lands because it's so stretched out. It is by far the most common failure in the episode. The show explains jokes to the audience and lingers on them far too much, which talks down to the viewer, ruins the pacing, and kills the rhythm. Every time the writing does this, you can feel the air leaving the room, and you can hear the soul leaving my body. The episode is bloated with exposition, but not just with the jokes either. Characters constantly announce their feelings and restate the plot so the story stays followable even if you are a quarter watching. Many of the episode's weakest jokes, like the "I don't mean to sound like every woman ever, but I'm depressed" line, exists not because they're actually funny, but as a way to tell the audience that Peter is sad now. It's hiding its story underneath jokes whenever it can, like a pill stuffed into your sick dog's food. You can see the same instinct in how the episode builds its conflict. Lois calls Peter an idiot every single week, but because the plot needs him to feel self-conscious about it, the script suddenly treats that insult like a personal crisis. When he brings this up in the clam, Quagmire just says, "So?" A line that openly admits there's no reason this should bother Peter at all. It's an okay joke on paper, but it also exposes the episode's themes. The story has to pause to justify its own premise, to explain why this time it's different, even though the show itself is pointing out that it shouldn't. The plot is held together by the character's own commentary, by what has to happen next, and not the character's genuine actions or reactions. And this attitude of treating telling a story as a nuisance is only made worse when the cutaway gags almost never relate to the plot, and they fire every 84 seconds on average. Nothing has any room to breathe. It isn't even that the story is just a vehicle for jokes, since most of the jokes have nothing to do with the story, even loosely. It is the most jarring thing in the world when Brian has to say, "This new Peter sounds all wrong," when he has already met this new Peter and is not judging him off how he sounds at all. He has to speak entirely unnaturally to segue into a joke about a dozen passengers dying in a violent plane crash in the middle of what is framed as the episode's emotional climax. The show repeatedly undercuts its own stakes like this. The open acknowledgement of the plot's contrivance, going into nonsensical cutaway gag after nonsensical cutaway gag when characters believe their lives are in danger, the literal fourth wall winks, all of it tells the audience that nothing matters beyond the next beat. It is hard to laugh with relief when the show refuses to create tension that could be relieved. Comedy needs a baseline to push against. If every moment is disposable, no moment can hit hard. So, needless to say, the time economy is rough. Jokes that clearly should have been cut are squeezed between better ideas and kept in no matter what. Even in sections with promise, like the earlier mentioned montage, they add in completely nothing jokes in between the genuinely clever ones, and drag the sequence despite clearly having no other ideas. In other shows, you want to leave the audience wanting more, but it feels like the writers want to rinse every scene out until it's dead and buried in a race for that 21-minute mark. The clown car bit is the worst case of this. Peter sees his friends go into the bar. Sad he can't join them, but resists because he sees them there all the time. Then a small car rolls up, and out comes a clown who enters the bar. He's once again sad that he's missing the clown, but resists because, well, what's the big deal? It's just one. And you'll never guess what happens next. Several clowns come out of the small car. They play a looping animation of clowns exiting the car for like 10 seconds. And just in case you don't get it, Peter says, "Aw, I was quite certain there was only one from the size of the car." This joke takes a full 30 seconds to tell in total. From the way it's delivered and the way Peter's dialogue is worded, it's clear that the joke being overly predictable and straightforward was done on purpose. However, acknowledging a joke being lazy and boring does not stop it from being that way. There's no subversion beyond maybe the acknowledgement itself. But spending 30 seconds telling a bad joke isn't much worth that weak punchline. But it makes far more sense when you realize the intention isn't to be funny, but to fill time. When filling time, over-explaining and stretching out jokes is an easy way to get to that finish line, even if it's also a great way to kill your audience. Finally, and I promise I won't harp on this point, but it really can't be overstated just how bad the animation is. Characters will stick exclusively to stock poses and expressions for 90% of the episode, and a character is never moving or reacting to anything unless they are actively speaking. This isn't meant to be a review of anything but the comedy, but this really does dampen the jokes, because the characters are so lifeless and never react to anything. It feels like watching a zombie do stand-up comedy to other zombies. But that is enough ranting. I think you all get the idea by now. Peter show bad. But you might be asking, what was the point of all this? We all knew Family Guy isn't pristine television. Why waste our time? Well, my stupid, idiotic, moronic, dumbass, empty-headed viewer, that's a very good question. Allow me to show you the punchline to this analysis, because I believe I have made a discovery, a theory, if you will, about what exactly makes Family Guy the way it is. Family Guy is purposefully written to be cut into clips. Family Guy Funny Moments is not a meme. It is the intended way to watch the show. The show really is better in clips. Not because there's less to sit through, but because its structure genuinely lends itself to the format far more than the conventional episodic structure. The characters constantly remind you of the plot and how they feel, so you never have to watch the scenes that came before. The jokes often have nothing to do with the story, because it doesn't think the audience even knows the story. The jokes that do intersect with the story often undercut the stakes, which discourages long-term investment, but only because there is no long-term investment. All of that is perfect for isolated, cut-down 30-second bites that circulate forever. Family Guy is not a sitcom. It is a clip show. Maybe this started as a way to serve casual viewers who would drop into episode midstream, an innocent way to catch channel surfers who wanted to watch something at 4:43 when every other show was in the middle of a structured story they'd be lost trying to navigate. But long before 2014, when this episode was released, it is just as likely that the show started optimizing shareable bits, the same way late night or sketch comedy adapted to the feed. The episode wants you to engage with it as little as possible. It provides stimulation and stimulation alone. You will not be confused. You will not even think. And it is a miracle high you'll chase forever when a writer happens to stumble into a clean idea or the performer nails the read. I should emphasize, I think this show is made by talented people. You can see that talent in the 20 or so good jokes spread across an episode. But it is in the structure, the writing philosophy, the context behind the script, which keeps dragging those good parts down back into the sludge. A great comedian in the writer's room is like a gourmet chef in a McDonald's. No amount of skill is going to make the food suitable as a meal. So, my dear viewers, I leave you one word of advice. Don't watch episodes of Family Guy. Enjoy all the Family Guy funny moments you want. It's what Seth MacFarlane would have wanted. Probably. I could be reading a bit too much into this.